Welcome to another episode of Muslims and Mental Health. Today I'm so happy and overjoyed to be joined by Dr. Khaled Abou El Fadl. Dr. Khaled Abou El Fadl was born in Kuwait and is the Omar and Esmeralda Alfi Distinguished Professor of Law at the UCLA School of Law, where he has taught courses on international human rights, Islamic jurisprudence, national security law, law on terrorism, Islam and human rights, political asylum, and political crimes and legal systems. I'd like to turn to another topic unrelated to this one, although some relationship. So when we look at our current times and looking at brain development particularly, we believe now through research that the brain doesn't develop until, approximately the mid-20s, right? And so given that reality, there puts into question a lot of questions around what is the age of responsibility. We know, like in secular society, rental car companies have up to the age when you can rent a car. You have to be at least 21 to rent a hotel room. Some of these, businesses have gotten wind that kids are just not mature enough to handle the responsibility at these younger ages of 18. And so if that's the case, it seems to put into question a lot of the decisions we make, from putting kids on college campuses at 18. How does this affect our understandings and rulings in Islam around the age of responsibility? Do we go back and change rulings, or how does this affect one's responsibility for their actions?
This question is actually plaguing a lot of Muslim societies, because very recently there was this enormous debate in Indonesia about child marriages and this insistence that, it must be okay because companions and the Prophet married girls when they're very young, and so how could we prohibit child marriages? And the same debate took place in Saudi Arabia. Egypt, countries like Egypt and Syria and Jordan and Algeria raised the age of marriage considerably for girls till 18 minimum, but the practice of child marriages continues unabated because of this. And so this is a really serious issue. The short answer is it would be irresponsible for jurists to ignore the biological evidence and on what is ultimately a biological question, and to rely solely on historical practice. One of the most fascinating things, or things that have always fascinated me, is that the Quran, when it talks about at what age God trusts prophets to fully become prophets, and it describes the age of maturity at 40, and that is we've not explored jurisprudentially that Quranic narrative that when it says balagha ashuddah, they became fully mature, and the Quran says that's age 40. The other thing is the Islamic jurisprudence, there were the majority position which said that the age of maturity for boys and girls is, for girls is when they get their menstrual cycle, and for boys when they are able to ejaculate or form sperm. That was the majority school for about 1,000 years. And there is a minority school that were predominantly Malikis, some of the Maliki school and some of the Hanafi school, that said that the age of maturity is to be determined by social standards. So, and they gave examples of how in some societies, especially as they spread into African societies and South Asian societies, that there were tests for manhood that children could not pass, or certain tattooing rituals that you had to undergo, and they basically said that no, at what point do you trust people with the right to enter contracts or enter marriages or become a trustee for orphans, for instance, which one jurisprudential prototype that they often discussed. Well, that has to be determined by society and not by a physiological cycle like menstruation. I think modern contemporary scholars are duty-bound to go back and to reflect on why the Quran says that the age of maturity is 40, and to go back and reread the opinions of these Maliki and Hanafi jurists that said that it's socially determined, and to reevaluate the jurisprudential factors and not simply accept the idea that, because we know that the Prophet himself told us that there are many things that he did in his capacity as a prophet, but that we human beings should not imitate and should not follow suit with. And I've said in many contexts before lectures, like when they say, well, the Prophet married Aisha, and assuming that we actually know how old Aisha was when she got married, although that's a big historical question because it's not clear. But assuming that we do, well, the Prophet had direct chaperoneship and guidance from God, and Aisha and Khadija and these women who were the founding mothers, I mean, they're not, you can't equal them. I mean, they were miraculously chosen by Allah as figures that are just exceptional in every sense. It would be extremely unfair to use that as a yardstick for the children around the world. The yardstick of how old Aisha was. I mean, that's insane.
Well, even thinking about the social context of that time, right? So one of the indicators we have that it wasn't a problem is that nobody went up in arms about the fact that they got married. Right?
History is full of examples of marriages at the age of 12, 13, right. 14, but, I mean, all over.
If it were a real problem.
It would,
that's
what
a lot of people in modern times use, isn't it? Well, just looking at the age, right? But if society had a problem with it, then
no one protested it.
Protesting over it.
No, I mean, and we do have, I mean, we can read through history and see how it was not at all something that even raised an eyebrow, but it should raise an eyebrow in our society, because I'm even troubled by, at this time. At this time, I'm deeply troubled by the fact that you're right. I mean, we do send 18-year-old kids and 19-year-old kids in places where we trust them to make decisions like whether to drink or not, whether to live on their own and become these. I mean, I don't know if this continues to be a social moray or a social standard. The idea that once you're 18, you're old enough to go on your own.
Right. That you don't need the support of your family anymore.
It's crazy. It's I mean, because, and I do. I mean, and again, I have to draw on my own experience growing up in Egypt. And Kuwait, but Egypt especially in the rural areas of Egypt and the villages, there is no way you can compare a teenager from the villages to a teenager from urban U.S. I mean, they're different human beings. They developed, matured physically in a very different way. Even just physiologically, you could see it. So I think the role of jurists would do well to work with psychologists and mental health professionals and to listen very carefully to the medical evidence, and whether the medical evidence involves social factors, anthropological factors, forensic factors, and or
environmental factors,
and factors that come through evolution, the evolving genetic pool. And
for example, we know in hotter climates, people tend to be more sexual than they do in colder climates. It's just the environmental factor.
That's really interesting.
So if we know that, then so I also hear you saying, correct me if I'm wrong, but I hear you saying that contextually, part of the context is also knowing your local reality.
Absolutely.
So if you're still living in maybe the south of Egypt, where it's more rural, maybe getting married at a younger age makes more sense, just for protection factors, right? As opposed to maybe living here in the United States, where there's a different reality on the ground. Maybe it doesn't make sense.
Until recently, I don't know. I'm actually interested in. I don't think Muslim scholars have done a good job working with mental health people or studying the physical, objective physiological evidence. And I mean, that is, law that theorizes just on precedent alone without looking at the empirical evidence becomes a very dangerous thing, because it could very equally result in tragedies, social tragedies. And I think that that's a continuing problem, because I don't think most legal scholars would even think about learning anything from the mental health field.
At the same time, you and I have talked about this before, keeping the boundaries wide open, because what's good in Saudi Arabia, for example, may not be good at all here.
Yeah, I mean, I don't mean all legal. I mean legal scholars in the Western context, because each context needs its own legal scholars and its own medical professionals and their own. But absolutely, I mean, I think you're right. Even the difference between urban contexts and the way children develop in urban societies versus rural seems to make a huge difference. I mean, I'm not sure why, but the kids of let's say Cairo, remain children much longer than the kids in the farm areas.
I mean, there's certain realities, just living, like life and death realities, that you have to adapt to at a younger age for survival. So, I mean, I think biology is very important. Well, I really appreciate that, I just, to further understand from what I don't know, right, is there anything wrong with sort of declaring that we have these local, juristic people who are over this area, and then there are people over this area?
No, I think that practically speaking, the main problem is that a lot of, again, those who want to be trained in Islamic law often will get their training in places like Saudi Arabia or Azhar in Egypt or Qarawin in Morocco, and then they will not just take the legal principles, but take also the legal precedents, the actual fatwa, the actual legal determinations, and come apply them in the US or in England, in Britain or wherever in Europe, verbatim, without rethinking anything, without investigating anything, without doing their due diligence and their homework about the difference in context. And they will then defend these legal determinations as the earmark of authenticity. And when you tell them, well, I understand that's what you learned in Egypt, or I understand that's what you learned in Morocco or Saudi Arabia or whatnot, but here's a different context, they become extremely defensive, as if you are trying to water down the Islamic tradition or dilute the Islamic tradition, or, dirty word, liberalize the Islamic tradition. And as you know, the accusation of liberalism, that you're, oh, you're just a liberal, pretty much silences all types of scholars, because they don't want to be seen as, be loose with God's law. But it's not being loose, it's being authentic and true to God's law.
Yeah.
I mean, if you, and I think it's intellectual laziness, because having to rethink the evidence and to say, and to relearn in different contexts takes a lot of hard work. It takes doing your homework rather than just repeating the same thing verbatim. And laziness and scholarship is an epidemic, especially in the age of social media. I mean, it's much easier to punch in keys and get some response off the net and then slap it on a situation than to actually do a systematic analysis and take a position and argue it and defend it. And that takes courage and it takes hard work. And that, I think, from the Islamic law point of view, is a serious systematic problem in the way we deal with Islamic law.
Part of our challenge, I think, is also having our young people understand why that's relevant. Because over the years, in looking at the programs that exist in America, whether it's the Rihla or the Alam program or any number of these programs that attempt to educate young people, they seem to be coming in year after year knowing less than the year before. And
that's really interesting.
It's why are they not being inspired in their home families? Why, or maybe the families weren't inspired in some way in their generation. You know, there's a problem there that we really need to look at, which raises a whole lot of other questions that we don't have time for today.
I want to just mention quickly that you know there is but this we could leave for another time. The prestige factor. We as Muslims have remained an immigrant community. As an immigrant community, we have continued to hold on to the idea that it is not a prestigious thing to be a scholar of Islamic law or Islamic theology.
Which is in direct contrast to the indigenous community's feelings about that.
Exactly, yeah. So you have a real serious tension here.
So before you leave, I always like to ask my guests a few fun questions.
Questions.
So I'm not going to let you get out of here without asking that. So the first one is, who is your hero if you have one, and why?
The most immediate hero, I mean, I have several heroes, I have to say, but the one that I think about every single day in my life is my mother. God rest her soul. I mean, she was. It's not just that she was an amazing mother, but she symbolized to me what a real, truly authentic, truly strong, truly compelling Muslim woman is. She imbued in me the love of knowledge. She taught me the beauty of ethics. She humbled my male ego and pruned it into size. I mean, squashed it until it became manageable. She taught me the ugliness of patriarchy without even giving me long lectures. She didn't describe herself as a feminist, but she just and everything she did, she thought of as natural Islam. This is just the Muslim way. And the longer I live, the more I don't meet people like her, and the more I realize how much of a blessing she was. May Allah yarhamha wa yahsin ilayha. She was just an amazing woman.
MashaAllah. Well, paradise is under the mother's feet, right?
Yeah, I pray so. I pray that I'm worthy.
Inshallah, inshallah. So what is your favorite concept and why?
My favorite concept is Allah is beautiful and loves beauty. The more I worship Allah, the more I just bewildered by that beauty. I mean, when it's when the Quran describes it as nur, as light, and the more you get a glimpse of that light, the more you just have this sense of like, oh my Lord, how, where does this beauty begin? Where does it end? It just, but then the fact that Allah loves beauty, that Allah wants us to be beautiful, is such a challenge. And I catch myself being ugly so often, and every time I'm so embarrassed because I imagine Allah looking at me and saying, I'm so disappointed. You're not beautiful enough. So I strive to be more beautiful. Yeah, I think that's, again, that's the concept. Probably if there was a concept that there hasn't been a day, that's a concept that I think of every day, multiple times. And, you know, whether I am in the car, seeing people drive, or I don't drive, but my wife drives, or doing anything. It's just, you can't escape it, and it's, yeah, that has been the overwhelming concept.
It almost sounds like it's a mindfulness activity for you.
Yeah, yeah, it's a constant state of being.
And so what is your favorite word and why?
Favorite word is Ar-Rahman, the all-compassionate, all-merciful. If we truly, I mean, that again, as you know, we say it in prayer numerous times. But the one thing that constantly comforts me every time I encounter, because I teach tragic fields. I teach political asylum, refugee law, human trafficking, you know, areas that are full of tragedy and suffering. And then I constantly remember the beauty of the word Rahman, the merciful, the compassionate. Yeah, when I see a lot of the things that the Trump administration does, I remember how important that concept is, how much we need it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, inshallah, it has been such a blessing to have you here.
And my pleasure, absolutely.
Although we are concluding, it's just the beginning. We have so much more to discuss, inshallah. So thank you very much for being here. This concludes another episode of Muslims and Mental Health. You can join us online on YouTube at Muslims and Mental Health by Sister Heather. You can also see our adjunctive websites, nafshealertherapy.wordpress.com for tools and resources, or the Center's website at centerformuslimmentalhealth.com, CTR4muslimmentalhealth.com. Thank you, and assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.